Hello and welcome to the Faces of Africa Pocket Edition, where we dissect and discuss the topics covered in our weekly documentary show, which takes you through the continent's history, cultures, and major issues through exploring great personalities. This week on Faces of Africa podcast, we're taking you to Egypt. We're telling you the story of Hosni Mubarak, who was Egypt's fourth president. My name is Fathiya Mohammed Noor, and I have here
Daniel Fernand, also
Daniel.
of CGTN.
Oh yes, hi Daniel, how are you?
Very good. Thanks for having me today.
It's exciting to have you here. Just the fact that you were the producer of this documentary. Very interesting documentary. Could you tell us a bit about your experience while doing this documentary?
Well, I worked very closely with an Egyptian director, Hosni, who really helped me gain an insight into how Egyptian people were feeling at the time. Mm-hmm. Now, when we executed this was right around the Arab Spring, and Hosni Mubarak had just been deposed. Yeah. And so there was a feeling among many people of looking at leadership in the Arab world very critically. Mm-hmm. But what we wanted to do was show how Mubarak had a very positive impact on his country, but also look at the reasons why, what happened during the Arab Spring happened negatively for him. And Hosni really helped me to understand the pride that Egyptians have in their history, right, but also how modern they are and how prone they are to react like other populations do to certain circumstances.
Right. I think watching the documentary myself, I learned so much from it. But I want us to talk about why it's important that we're airing this documentary at this particular point. Of course, what's happening in the world at the moment.
It is an appropriate time to look at this, in part because it looks at the consequences of what's happened when there has been conflict between Israel and its neighbors in the past. Mm-hmm. And Egypt has been a very key part of that. In the documentary, you find out about the 3 different wars that Israel has fought with its neighbors. And you also find out about how that launched Mubarak's political career because of how he was able to prepare Egypt for the last war, the 1973 war. And it also shows how Mubarak put Egypt in a situation to negotiate and to develop a relationship with Israel from a position of strength, right, rather than a position of weakness. And what we're seeing right now is a lot of characters try to deal with Israel from a position of weakness. Yeah. And maybe Mubarak and Egypt, the modern Egypt today, can help somehow transform the situation.
October 6th was a lucky day for Hosni Mubarak. It opened the doors for him to enter Egyptian history. On that day, he led the first flight in the October War. Years later, he found himself the president of the largest and most influential Arab country when Anwar Sadat was assassinated on October 6, 1981, in the famous podium attack.
Even when you watch the documentary, you really understand that Mubarak really was pushing for peace. But let's talk briefly about the wars, the 3 wars. And again, the main war that happened in October, and we're in October in 1973. Let's talk about the 6-Day War that happened in 1967. How do you think that propelled Hosni Mubarak to where he got at that time?
It's a good topic to bring up because it shows how somebody needs to have a vision of how you develop strength. And so when the 1967 war ended disastrously, and Egypt lost a huge amount of territory, very strategic territory, what do you do when you're in that situation? I mean, how do you recover from something like that? Do you become emotional? Yeah. Do you appeal to people outside your country to come to your aid, to the international community to somehow change the geopolitics there? I mean, what Mubarak did is he went and strengthened what he had control over.
Definitely. I mean, it just shows where Egypt was at that particular point in terms of just ensuring that there's peace. But then again, at the time, he became a vice president under Anwar Sadat. And then still on the peace, we know that the Camp David peace accords happened at that particular time. Now, this was now between Israel and Egypt. First time for an Arab state, right? So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it was very brave for Sadat to take these steps in order to try to create peace in the region moving into the future. I mean, what happened afterwards were many of the Arab countries broke relations with Egypt, feeling that they were a traitor. But Sadat was seeing the future. He was able to see how peace in the region was better for everybody. And when you have war in the region now, you see how many people are suffering. I mean, how many people are suffering from Palestine? How many people are suffering from Lebanon? How many people are suffering from Iran? How many people are suffering from Yemen? I mean, even the Egyptians are having to take in refugees and having to deal with the humanitarian situation, putting a stress on their economy. So peace is good. Yeah, and I think Mubarak saw that peace through strength was important. Yeah, and when they were able to sit down with Israel, they weren't sitting down saying, "Please don't hurt us." They were saying, "Okay, we evened things up the last time. Let's talk about how this can benefit both of us."
But let me ask, do you think Egypt was a bit selfish at this point? Because you see, they were fighting with Israel as much as they were trying to maintain peace. But at the same time, the Arab nations around them were still being affected by what was happening in Israel. Do you think Egypt was being selfish at that point?
Well, I think that for any government, you have to look after your people first. So I don't think that anybody would point at a country looking after its own self-interest and say that's completely wrong. But the other thing is that they were leading by example. Yeah, nobody knew what peace with Israel would bring. Would it bring the kind of dividend that it did, a peace dividend, a monetary dividend, or a financial dividend that helped Egypt develop its country, or would Israel take advantage of it and skirt the agreement and still prosecute grievances against Egypt? Who knew how it was going to turn out? Yeah. But the vision turned out to be, something that improved Egypt's lot, and that now other Arab countries have followed in to make their own diplomatic relations with Israel, seeing the benefits that Egypt received.
For sure. I mean, I think, unfortunately, Anwar Sadat was assassinated. I think it was in 1979, if I'm not wrong. And so Hosni Mubarak immediately came in, and I don't think that was part of his expectation, but hey, he got in, served for 3 decades, basically 30 years. Do you think he overstayed in that seat?
Certainly.
Like any other African president, right?
Well, again, when you look at these men of advanced age that are in power, is it them? Is it we recently reran the Mugabe documentary. Is it them? Is it that they want to hold on to power, or is it people around them that want to keep them in power because then they get favors from the state and they have prestige and they're worried about what the next person is going to do? So maybe it was Mubarak holding on, but most likely it was people around him, encouraging him to hold on. But the key that you need to find is you need to have that patriotism to want to leave the country better than you found it. But the other thing is you need to groom successors, not just one person that then is handed the power, but people that compete with each other with different ideas, ways to improve the country. That makes your government more successful, and it ends up helping people make the choice of who they want to be their leader by showing people that have distinguished themselves in some way and deserve the people's trust.
Right. Wow. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast, Daniel. I think it's going to be a very interesting documentary. The documentary is actually called 3 Decades of Power, right? And I think it's going to be an interesting watch, especially with whatever that's happening in the world at the moment. So thank you for your time.